Well, with more on the carbon tax debate, we're now joined by Severson-Baker, the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, it's interesting that you're in town here because you come as the Conservative leaders talking about having a non-confidence vote, looking for an election basically centered around a carbon levy. Do you worry in any way if there were an election on that?
It does concern me because, putting a price on pollution works. It's the most efficient policy that we have. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about how the policy isn't supposed to work, how the rebates work for Canadians and that sort of thing. And that really, if we were to not have that policy approach, we would have to resort to less efficient policy options like regulations, incentives and things like that. And that would be a shame. And I think it's really important as we're having this conversation in Canada right now to differentiate between the consumer-facing carbon price, which is what most of the conversation has been about, and the industrial carbon price, which is a lot more like what we have had in the past around putting a price on pollution for acid rain and other things clearly has worked. And so we don't want to lose that.
You don't want to lose that, but let's talk a little bit more about you call it misinformation, but just how effective has the carbon regime been, both economically and environmentally?
Well, it's from an the industrial consumer price is very effective. It's companies are basing long-term plans on an understanding that the price is going to go up over time, so that companies that can reduce pollution and generate credits would be able to sell them and be able to, that helps pay for the cost of doing the project. And then companies that have a higher cost of reducing emissions can buy those credits from others. And overall, we get the level of reduction that we're trying to achieve. And that is a very elegant, very flexible market-based solution that we want to make sure that we keep. For consumers, I think there's been a real problem with communicating to consumers about the carbon price, the fact that that you get the money back, the fact that if you are able to put the money that you're getting back towards lowering your emissions of carbon, that you will be better off financially. And these messages just haven't been effectively delivered to Canadians, unfortunately.
Okay, not delivered effectively. I do want to get to that in a moment, but let's talk a bit more about the price structure itself. It seems to be, for example, right now that the Conservatives basically want to stop the increase. That's step one in this current campaign. They want to stop the increase on the carbon levy come April the 1st. Could you stop that increase without having a negative impact on the whole system overall?
Right. So for the industrial consumers, it would be a devastating impact because it would create a lot of uncertainty about if and when the price would continue to rise in the future. It'd make it very difficult to plan, to actually do your economic forecasts. Like, are we going to be? What is the cost of carbon in the future? What is the value of a credit that if we were able to generate it? Same thing for the buyers of those credits. Are there going to be credits available that we can buy, or are we going to be facing some kind of a regulatory regime that may be imposed in the future in order for Canada to find a way to reduce its emissions? So very, very disruptive for heavy industry. And nobody is really, unfortunately, we're not talking about the industrial carbon price a lot in the current political discourse. And I know that industry is lobbying behind the scenes to try to ensure that that regime stays in place, because it is the most economic and efficient system that we could have. For consumers, for individual consumers and household consumers, it would also have a negative impact in the sense that it would you wouldn't be able to you wouldn't know if that carbon price is going to go up in the future. So you wouldn't know if I do an energy efficiency project in my house this year, if you're going to be avoiding the carbon price or not, or it's not going to necessarily help you in terms of making a decision about whether or not to buy a heat pump rather than replacing your natural gas furnace. So that is just not helpful. And what it what it would mean is that if we were to eliminate these carbon pricing in general, is we would have to implement a series of regulations or incentives to try to do the same work that the carbon price would do. And we know that those types of things are difficult. They're not popular. It creates a lot of red tape and ultimately costs everybody more money to actually comply.
Could you separate and have solely an industrial policy and not have a consumer policy?
You could. It's not ideal, but I think it's fair to say that at this point, because there has been so much of an attack on the consumer carbon price, that it's really not popular. And at the same time, there hasn't been a lot of really strong public education around why the carbon price is in place and how the rebate system works and things like that. But it could be canceled, and you could replace it with a series of other policy mechanisms that would achieve the same outcome. Again, not the most efficient way to do it. On the industrial carbon pricing side, yeah, you could have just an industrial carbon pricing system. And I know that is something that industry would welcome because of the sort of the economic certainty that it gives them.
Quickly running out of time, but I do want to circle back to your point about communicating the benefits of having a consumer carbon price in particular. What type of messaging do you think needs to be out there? What do you think people need to know, as you say, because they're swimming right now in a lot of different cross-information, misinformation?
I think one of the things that's really hasn't come through is that people that are young people who don't have big houses and they don't have multiple cars and don't go on lots of trips are actually getting a lot more money back in the rebate than they're putting out in terms of the carbon price. So this whole notion that it is it's contributing to the affordability crisis that young Canadians are experiencing is false. In fact, it's one of the things that's actually helping blunt the impact of higher costs for housing and transportation and food and that sort of thing. That carbon price is sending you a strong message. If you can keep your carbon emissions down as your income grows and as you move through different stages of your life, you will be better off financially, and that's really what it's intended to do. But that message has not been clearly relayed, and so it's really unfortunate that the people that are benefiting right now from being a low emitter and receiving a higher rebate don't actually realize that.
Chris Severson-Baker, appreciate taking the time while you're here in Ottawa. Thank you for that.
Thank you.